So for the uninitiated, is that us? Are we going?
We are live. So, hello everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland. I am the chair of the Sea Scout Committee's marketing group, and we are privileged to have one of my longtime friends, Max Rosenberg, who's the skipper, the Intrepid. He is a two-time graduate of the California Maritime Academy and one amazing boat handler and just a wonderful human being. And with that, Max is here to go over rules of the road tonight. And we will cover this, and we are going to stream live to Facebook, and really hope you enjoy tonight's presentation. So Max, take it away.
All right. Well, thanks. Thanks everyone for being here. I know, we're kind of in weird times these days, but doing our best to just kind of keep the program alive. So definitely getting used to the Zoom meetings, and I'm sure, like the rest of you, hoping to get down to the boats again pretty soon. But in the meantime, just trying to make the best of everything. So I hope I can offer you guys a pretty good presentation on rules of the road here tonight. And just to make sure, like quick business, I know I'm usually pretty good at reading a calendar, but we had a little foobar, so I wanted to point out anybody that saw like the original postings going out about this. We're going to do it in two parts. So we're going to have the presentation tonight, and originally we said we were going to have a presentation on Thursday evening, but it's actually now going to be on Wednesday evening. So I urge everybody to join us again on Wednesday evening, same bat time, 1800. We'll do the second part. So we're going to do about 2/3 of the ordinary requirement tonight, and then pick up the last third. There's like a logical break about at that point. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're going to go tonight over the navigation rules and regulations is what the kind of the real, maritime professional name for this is. But we usually just call it the rules of the road, even though it's the rules of the water. And so we're going to go over the rules of the road. We're going to cover in these presentations the ordinary requirement. Technology. Here we go. The ordinary requirement, it's requirement number 9 in the Sea Scout manual for navigation rules. So things that we're going to cover tonight, we're going to go over explaining the purpose of the navigation rules, both international and inland. And we're going to talk a little bit about the difference and why we have two sets. We're going to talk about the rule of responsibility, which is one of the rules in the rules of the road. And then we're going to talk about stand-on and giveaway vessels and how to know which one you are and what do you do when you are the stand-on or giveaway vessel. And and that's for vessels when you're meeting. We have different situations we call meeting, crossing, or overtaking, and we'll talk about that for power vessels and for sailing vessels. And then we're going to explain responsibility between vessels, which is kind of how different vessel categories interact. And we'll talk about what those different vessel categories are. And that's sometimes also known as vessel priority. And there's a couple different names for it. We'll talk about that as well. On Thursday evening, we're going to talk about nav lights. Primarily, we're going to talk about like basic nav lights for power-driven vessels, sailing vessels, and smaller vessels. Nav lights is a pretty big subject, so we're going to, as you move into working on your ABLE requirements, you get a lot more into nav lights and the different nuances of nav lights with like towing vessels and other vessel categories where there's like lots of little subtle differences that define different types of vessels. But we're going to talk primarily just about the basic lights for power and sailing vessels and smaller vessels. And then we'll finish up on Wednesday night with sound signals, both for maneuvering, a warning, and in restricted visibility. So like if you're in a fog or weather situation, what sound signals do you use to identify yourself to other vessels that might not be able to see you? So I'm going to try and keep moving. We got about an hour to try and cover, these first 4 requirements. If you have any questions, I'm going to try and stop, maybe not after every slide, but, good break points along the way. So whatever your, forum of choice here, whether you're on Facebook, Zoom, Mr. Gilliland's going to try and watch the chats for me. So if you get some questions in there, we'll get a break and I'll try and answer questions. Hopefully, I'll cover the material pretty well, but if something does seem a little unclear, go ahead and chat in a question and we'll try and get to as many as we can. Okay, so we'll jump right in here. Moving in some ways, the navigation rules is like one of the simpler topics that we cover in our advancement, because everything you need to know about navigation rules is all in one book. It all falls in a single book, but there's a lot of material in that book. So a lot of it is covered in the Sea Scout manual, but 100% of it is covered in the Navigation Rules and Regulations Handbook. This is a handbook that's for us in the U.S. It's distributed by the Coast Guard. And so these days, that means the Department of Homeland Security, and it's got both the international and inland rules in it. So we've talked about the fact there are 2 sets of rules. There's international and inland. And you might ask, why do we have 2 sets of rules? And do I need to know both the sets of rules? Like maybe I just cruise around here and I'm just in the US, and so would I only need to know the inland rules? So that's the second question, is easier to answer. You do really need to know both sets of rules. And the reason is that you don't actually have to go very far before you're in waters that are covered by the international rules. So for me, like I've lived all my life in the San Francisco Bay Area. That's primarily where I've spent my career working on tugboats and sea scouting and everything like that. So here in the bay and up in the rivers, we're under the inland set of rules. But if we go out under the Golden Gate Bridge and want to do even a little bit of near coastal cruising, we only have to go 3 miles past the Golden Gate Bridge, which doesn't even actually get us past land before we're covered under the international rules. So international rules are covered anywhere past the demarcation lines in the United States. And so so we have these 2 sets of rules that you kind of have to know where you are, where that demarcation line is, to know which set of rules you're following. Another example for any scouts that we have that are in the Puget Sound area, as it turns out, Puget Sound, even though you'd assume that that's inland waters, all of Puget Sound is actually covered by the international nav rules, not by the inland nav rules. And that has to do with the fact that the inland passage runs down into Puget Sound, and that's international waters because it heads up through Canada and then back up into Alaska. So you end up on effectively an international voyage. So it's good to know which set of rules you need to cover for the area that you're in. Predominantly, the rules are pretty much the same. Over the years, the 2 have kind of been kind of massaged, and for the most part, you'll find that the inland rules almost word for word are the same as the international rules. Another thing you should know about this book, if you do have a paper copy of it, if you pick this up, you'll always find that throughout the whole book, the way the book is printed, you're going to find the international rule for that section printed on the left-hand side here, and the inland rule for that section printed on the facing page. So everywhere you open the book, you're going to see the international rule and the inland rule side by side. And for the most part, what you're going to find is word for word, they're the same. There are some subtle differences throughout, and you'll actually if you get into, when you get into your able requirement, you'll see that a lot more in like towing lights and things like that. But there are some subtle differences between the international and the inland. We came to have two sets of rules primarily because they were developed at about the same time. While the international community, maritime community, was developing the international set, our U.S. rules were kind of coming together and becoming more cohesive. We were taking rules from all over the country and trying to make a solid set. And they kind of came to be at the same time. And in the U.S., we've stuck with that. We've said we want to have a different set of rules for our inland waters. So as you get into the nav rules, if you were just to go ahead and read this book, it'd be pretty boring. It's a pretty wordy book, and there's not a ton of pictures, but what you'd start off with is you'd find that the book opens with two preambles. One is for the international rules and one is for the inland rules. So I like to start out by throwing up this preamble for the international rules. I don't expect anybody to read this. You can just see it. If you were kind of a history buff and you have some interest in understanding where these rules came from, you can read it. It's got a bunch of dates in it, how this all kind of came together. But the gist of what this says is that there's a treaty, they call it a convention, and it's where all the major maritime countries in the world came together and formed an organization that's now called the IMO. At the time, it was called the Intergovernmental Maritime Cumulative Organization, but now the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, and they make treaties or conventions where major maritime countries from around the world sign on to these conventions and agree that we're going to collectively follow these rules. And one of those conventions was in 1972. That's not going to be on the test, but they put together this set of rules called the International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea. And the idea was that we would have this set of rules that when boats came together and found each other, how are they going to interact? How are they going to interact with each other to try and prevent themselves from running into each other? And so all these fancy words that they put on the page here, out of all of these, there's 4 words in here that basically explain the whole purpose of the international nav rules and the inland nav rules. So we can like right away check box one of these requirements in the ordinary requirements that says you need to explain the purpose of the international navigation rules. And we're going to pull 4 words out of this whole paragraph here, and we're going to find that it is very simple, that all we are trying to do here is we have a set of rules for preventing collisions at sea. Sole purpose of this entire book is how are boats going to interact with each other, such as to prevent collisions at sea. We don't want boats to run into each other. And so we had to put together quite a few rules to figure that out, but that's the gist of everything we're going to learn about tonight, is we want to do that. So there's another preamble in the book that's for the inland rules. It rambles on a whole lot more. It really doesn't tell you a whole lot. I wouldn't even recommend it for history buffs that want to understand. It basically says we had a whole bunch of different sets of rules and we tried to make them into one. But the gist in there is, when it finally kind of comes around to a point, is that the inland rules are very similar in both content and format to the international rules. So they're almost word for word the same with some minor exceptions. They're formatted the same. They're put on facing pages in the book so that you can look at both the international rule and the inland rule at the same time and understand whether there actually are any differences for that specific rule. So I'll throw up one more interesting tidbit fact and a piece of information while I'm talking. If anybody, I think, Josh, we got these, did we get these web pages posted up on the invite on Facebook and Zoom?
Yes, so they were posted to the Facebook group, and they also went out in the reminder email an hour ago.
Got it. So hopefully everybody has seen these. These are 2 links that are good. They're Coast Guard links to places where you can find this nav rules book. So if you don't have a paper copy, you can go online and you can look at it. One of these links takes you to something that's formatted very much like the book, and one of them takes you to something that's formatted a lot more like a web page. So you can choose which format works better for you. The interesting, an interesting, really relevant current fact about this, these web links, is that As technology has advanced in the maritime industry, we've moved way more into electronics and a lot less paper. So whereas like when I was a kid and I first started learning about this stuff in Sea Scouts, even big ships that had, you know, the money for electronic systems were still required to carry paper charts, carry all their publications as paper books, correct them by hand so that you had all the corrections throughout the year in the books and they were all relevant from day to day. And over the last, say, you know, 15, 20 years, we've moved away from that significantly. Most ships now carry all electronic charts. They're using ECDIS systems and everything. And up until very recently, the navigation rules book was the only book that you were still required by law to carry in a paper format. And that actually changed this month. And so now legally, this was the last book you had to carry in paper. And now if you download a copy of it to a computer on your ship, you can sail without a paper copy. And so that makes these nav links or these web links much more relevant to the commercial industry. So that's just something that literally just happened this month. The Coast Guard put out a NAVIC that we no longer have to carry this in paper anymore, so we can carry an electronic copy. Okay, so let's jump into the meat. So the way I've kind of formatted my presentation here is for some of the wordy rules, what I've done is I've thrown them up here and I've thrown the actual text of the rule as it is in the book here on the left-hand side, and a kind of more like, you know, general interpretation of what the rule really means here on the right, and I'll talk a little bit about them. So there's 2 rules. There's actually, throughout the book, there's 38 rules. If they're divided up into like 5 sections and then like 3 major categories. And then there's a couple annexes at the end that kind of explain the difference between the international and the inland. None of those numbers will be on any test, but you know, it's good to understand. We're going to cover about 22 out of 38 of the rules between the 2 evenings. Some of them are not as relevant as others. You'd think rule number 1 would probably be the most important, but it actually turns out to be more of a preamble than anything else. And so we're going to jump in at number 2. I would suggest that there are 2 rules in here, really one significantly, but rule number 2 that out of the 38 rules in here, there are probably 2 that are good to know by number. So if somebody said, hey, do you know what rule number 2 is? That'd be good. With the exception of those 2, the rest of them, it's good to understand the content, but knowing which number rule they are is not that important. So rule number 2 is a pretty significant one. And by going through this slide, we're going to check another box in the ordinary requirement because we're going to understand the rule of responsibility. I put the rule of in parentheses because in the NAV rules book, this is actually just called responsibility, but it's typically referred to as the rule of responsibility. So what rule 2 is broken up into 2 sections, A and B, B being a little bit more important, but the gist of what A says is that nothing in the rules will save you from not following the rules. Using good practices or common sense as the case requires. So the framers of these rules tried to cover, you know, every conceivable situation and develop rules that would allow people to have, you know, structure for how they will interact with other vessels, but they couldn't possibly conceive every situation you might encounter. And so they came up, you know, the gist of the rules, of certain rules, are that you're going to have to engage some common sense and use good practices as you're boating. You're not going to be able to find every situation by opening the book and cracking it and finding the rule that says, what do I do right now? So that's kind of the gist of what A says, is that none of these rules are going to be in conflict. You can't ever use one rule to say why you broke another rule. You should follow all the rules, but engage some common sense and make sure you use good practices while you're out on the water. B is really the meat of the rule of responsibility. And what it says is your responsibility as a boater every time you go out on the water to know the rules. So that means understanding the information that's in the NAV rules pub, to know the hazards. That could be all kinds of different things, anything from rocks and shoals and land and things in the area you're boating in, other vessels. Know the circumstances. What is the weather like today? Are there any big marine events like sailing regattas or something that are going to draw a lot more traffic to the area? And know your boat. What is your boat capable of? Are you on a giant container ship that takes a mile to stop or turn around? Or are you on a little ski boat that's quite maneuverable? So you need to understand the capabilities of your vessel, and to an extent, the capabilities of vessels around you, so that you can avoid danger to you and others. So that's the gist of the rule of responsibility. It's your responsibility to know the rules, know the hazards, know the circumstances, know your boat, and avoid danger to you and others. Because, like we said in the beginning, the whole idea of the rules of the road is to avoid collisions at sea. So we're trying to avoid having boats run into each other. All right, so that's probably a good spot if we had any questions on any of the material we've covered so far.
There is one. Do the nav rules book contain current erratas?
Current erratas. Can you help me out with what we mean by that?
I think this is my interpretation. It'd be like an update to it.
Yeah. So yes. So the rules, like anything, do get updated periodically. And so obviously, if you have an old paper copy, I've actually got a paper copy sitting here on my desk since I've been working on this presentation. But if you have an old copy, the paper copy is not going to update itself. So there are updates that are sent out for all publications and charts and everything like that in your notice to mariners, where you can update publications that you carry. But now with the advent of electronic copies, like the web links that I put up there, the Coast Guard does a pretty good job of keeping that stuff up to date, so that we can just download fresh copies so that they're always up to date. Typically with the big international treaties, things like MARPOL and coal regs and things like that, they're not updated all the time like charts are. So they're typically updated in, after several years, there'll be a big convention of the IMO, and they'll update the convention. So that doesn't, with most of the big IMO conventions, that usually only happens about maybe every 10 years or so. So the rules don't change significantly, frequently, I guess would be the word. Okay. So let me jump into the next section. So we're going to jump into Rule 3. We're going to go in order here for just a little bit, and then we're going to kind of get out of order. So Rule 3 is general definitions. And what they did here, this is actually a list of all the definitions that they put in the book. So there weren't all that many. The rest of the stuff is pretty plain language, but they wanted to make clear what they meant by these certain things. And so we'll just run through them real quick. Vessel, that's pretty self-explanatory, but they do say that this is a description of every type of watercraft. So a vessel could mean any type of watercraft you find out on the water. Power-driven vessel is a vessel propelled by machinery. So typically that's going to be an engine, but it could be an electric motor. Nowadays, we're seeing a lot more of that. We're seeing, we're even seeing hydrogen-powered vessels that are electric-powered. So anything that's powered by machinery. A sailing vessel is a vessel under sail and not using machinery. That's a pretty important distinction, because if you're out sailing on your sailboat and your sailboat has an engine, as soon as you fire that engine up, you are no longer a sailing vessel. You are a power vessel, regardless of whether you still have a sail up. So it has to be a sailing vessel is only a sailing vessel if it is being powered only by the wind. A vessel engaged in fishing is going to be any fishing vessel except for a trolling vessel. So that's if you were out just dragging, some lines behind a small boat. A seaplane is going to be an aircraft maneuvering on the water. So once the seaplanes are kind of up in the air, they're not really our problem anymore. But if you had a seaplane maneuvering about on the water, it'd be considered under the category of seaplane. Vessel not under command. This is a pretty important definition. So a vessel not under command, sometimes we call them NUC or NUC for short, is going to be a vessel that by exceptional circumstances, and I put that in quotations because it's the most important distinction of this definition, that a vessel by exceptional circumstances is unable to maneuver as required. So this is going to be a boat that didn't set out to be this way. They left, maybe this is a ship. We've been having a problem with a ship in the Bay Area, having this quite a bit lately. Where this is a ship that maybe set out, they left a dock, and after they left the dock, they had some kind of steering or propulsion failure. It could be something else, but some kind of exceptional circumstance that caused them to not be able to maneuver as required. So they probably started out as a standard power vessel and then lost steering. And so now they've become what we call a vessel not under command because of exceptional circumstances. The importance of that distinction is because of the next definition, the vessel restricted in her ability to maneuver. And a vessel restricted in her ability to maneuver is going to be a vessel that actually set out to be that way. So that's going to be a vessel, and I put this in quotations because the important distinction is by the nature of her work, is we call it that by the nature of her work is unable to maneuver as required. So that's going to be a vessel that set out and knew that because of what she does, she's not going to be able to maneuver as well as a standard power vessel. So good examples of that are like a buoy tender trying to stay on station and to lift a buoy onto, her buoy deck, or trying to reset a buoy. It could be a dredge, like a dredge going out and trying to dig out a channel. And they've typically got to go pretty slow, but they can't maneuver very well because they've got a lot of gear down on the bottom, dragging the bottom. Could be an underway replenishment vessel. That's like when two vessels ride side by side and transfer cargo across, or maybe even a towing vessel, although typically they would fall under a towing vessel category. But it could be somebody, that's doing some kind of exceptional towing maneuver that's causing her to be restricted in ability to maneuver. So the difference between vessel not under command is because of exceptional circumstances. A vessel restricted in her ability to maneuver is going to be because of the nature of her work. Okay, so that's the difference between those two. Although they're both going to have difficulty maneuvering compared to a regular power vessel. A vessel constrained by draft is that's one of the differences between international and inland rules. This is defined in the international rules, but not in the inland rules. But just like it sounds, a vessel constrained by her draft is going to be a vessel that is too deep to deviate from her course. So she might be running in a dugout channel. You have a channel that's been dredged to a certain depth. And if you encountered this vessel, she's not going to be able to veer off course and leave more space for somebody else because the water is too shallow outside of that channel. So she's constrained by her draft. She has to be where she is. Underway, pretty simple concept, basically means that you're not at anchor, you're not made fast, and you're not aground. So you're not high and dry aground, you're not tied to a pier or a dock, and you're not at anchor. Any other situation, you're considered underway. You don't actually have to be making way. You don't have to be moving well, but if you're floating out there, you're considered underway. Length and breadth, again, pretty simple, but in the NAV rules, they define this as overall length and greatest breadth. So sometimes we measure boats a little bit differently, but if you have a boat that has like a big scooped bow, we're going to measure the overall length of the boat. And if you have a boat, that's really fair in front, gets wide in the middle, and maybe narrower in the back, we're going to measure the greatest breadth. So when we talk about the size of vessels, the length of vessel, the width of a vessel, we're talking about the greatest length and greatest breadth. In sight is a vessel that just means that boats can see each other. So sometimes boats are too far apart to be able to see each other, but they still need to interact with each other somehow. So if a vessel is considered to be in sight, that means they're close enough or the weather is such that they can see each other. Restricted visibility is going to be specifically because of weather. So visibility restricted by weather. So darkness is not considered to be restricted visibility. That just means it got dark. And we use lights and we can still see each other pretty well. But if the fog rolls in or it's raining really hard and we can't see each other, that's going to be considered restricted visibility. Wing and ground craft is one you can almost throw out. We really don't see these anymore. It was a trend more in Russia than anywhere else. This was kind of a Soviet thing, but they were like kind of like seaplanes that fly really low on the water, and they depend on surface effect. So they can't actually fly up off the water, but they can fly up enough to be not touching the water anymore. And they define them like crazy in the rules. They come up in the rules all the time, so we talk about it, but your likelihood of seeing one is very slim. Western rivers is defined as the Mississippi River and its tributaries, etc. Like the waters that lead into the Mississippi River is what we call the Western rivers. The Great Lakes also pretty simple. It's going to be the Great Lakes and all their connecting waters. So the canals and stuff that connect the Great Lakes to each other and to other waterways. Anywhere that the word secretary is mentioned, they mean the secretary of the department which the U.S. Coast Guard is in. They don't specifically say which department that is. That's primarily because the U.S. Coast Guard tends to get kicked around a little bit. They used to be part of the Department of Treasury, then they were the Department of Transportation, now they're the Department of Homeland Security. So anywhere they mention the word secretary, they're talking about the secretary of that department. Inland waters are going to be the navigable waters of the U.S. inside the demarcation lines. So like I talked about in the beginning, that's going to be like in San Francisco, that's going to be about 3 miles outside the Golden Gate Bridge. The inland rules or rules are going to be the rules we follow when we're on inland waters, and the international regulations are going to be the coal regs, the rules we follow when we're outside of U.S. inland waters. So that's all the definitions that they give us for this whole book. So everything else they consider to be pretty plain language. And so we just got to remember those few things. So we'll jump ahead here. We're going to skip over Rule 4, which is not so significant, and jump right into Rule 5. This is one that we're pretty good at in Sea Scouts. It's lookout. So what the Rule 5 says is you got to have a lookout. So you can't go around blindfolded. You have to have somebody looking out that's looking for other boats. This doesn't have to be a unique position. You don't always have to have somebody that is assigned just as the lookout. Sometimes it could be the helmsman. It could be the guy driving the boat. But you have to have a lookout. The guy, whoever that is, guy or gal, has to look and listen and use other tools available to them. That's probably things like a radar, a GPS, an AIS, to look at where other vessels are. And primarily, again, their position is there to try and help avoid collision. So they're looking out for other boats to try and figure out when a collision potentially exists and maneuver accordingly. Another kind of GA rule we're going to talk about real quick here is safe speed. So you might ask, is there a speed limit on boats and ships? Well, sometimes local areas do impose speed limits, but the international and inland rules do not. What they say is, don't go faster than you can avoid a collision. So if you need to use some common sense there, you need to understand, how well can I see other vessels? How many other boats are out there? How fast can I turn and stop? Are there a lot of distracting lights maybe at night if you're cruising across San Francisco Bay, where I spend a lot of my time, and if you're cruising, downbound across Central Bay, you're going to see all the backscatter of the San Francisco skyline. And is that distracting you from seeing other vessels? How bad is the weather? If it's raining really bad and it's really foggy, you might want to go a little bit slower so that you know that you're able to see other vessels before a collision potential exists. is the water around you deep enough? You know, do you need to be in this specific spot? So you need to take those things into account to decide how fast you can go safely without, you know, presenting a collision risk. Another thing that they talk about is radars. So most commercial vessels and a lot of Sea Scout vessels, we use radars. If you're using a radar, you need to take into account the limits of your radar. How far can your radar see? Are you going to be able to see a vessel soon enough at the speed you're going? So maybe if your radar can't see out that far, your radar maybe is not mounted high enough, or it's not a long range radar. Maybe you need to slow down a little bit so that you see vessels before you can react to them. How does the weather affect your radar? Radars have a nasty habit of picking up rain and swell and things like that. And so sometimes you'll start seeing a lot of things on your radar that aren't really boats, and then you start kind of losing the boats in those things. So you got to take into account the effect of the radar. What can the radar see? What can't the radar see? One thing that radars don't see very well usually is sailboats. You'd say, well, on the horizon, a sailboat's got a huge sail. It looks like a big sail area. But radars don't bounce off of sails very well, and they don't bounce off of fiberglass very well. So if you have even a pretty large fiberglass sailboat, radars aren't going to see them very well. So, you know, if you think there are a lot of fiberglass sailboats out there, your radar is not going to do you a lot of good for that. You know, how many boats can your radar see at the time? And so really, how much does your radar help? So those are all the things you need to take into account while you decide, use your common sense to decide how fast can I go safely. Just for an example of actual speed limits, here in San Francisco, traffic controlled vessels, so that's big deep draft vessels that actually have to check in with vessel traffic, are regulated to 15 knots over the water. So if you have a big ship transiting the bay, they're not allowed to go faster than 15 knots. Escorted tankers that are in Central Bay, so if that's a laden tanker, a tanker full of oil, they're not allowed to travel more than 10 knots. And if they're upriver, like up in the Vallejo, Carquinez area, they're not allowed to go more than 8 knots. So there are some imposed speed limits, but there's no speed limits that are imposed by the rules of the road. All right, that's probably a good chance if do we have any questions up until this point?
Yes, so there's several. So
okay.
One was URL, but I'm not sure which URL he was asking for, they were asking for. Another is, I'll answer this, you know, what's the YouTube channel? And that's Sea Scouts BSA and on YouTube. And the other is technical. How does Rule 5 apply to people who do long solo passages around the world, etc.?
Okay, so let me back up to Rule 5 while I'm talking about that. So Rule 5 just says that you must have a lookout, but it doesn't designate that lookout has to be a unique person. And so if you were, I guess to steer away from the actual question for just a second, if you were like tandem sailing, say on like a transpac or something where you had at least 2 people, the helmsman that was up could serve as that lookout. If you are soloing around the world, technically this is going to be a pretty hard rule for you to follow. And so usually I'm not a solo around the world sailor. I'm not even really a sailor in the sailboat sense. And so I don't have a lot of experience with that, but I'd say typically you're probably not really following this rule, like if you're sleeping. And I think a lot of times what solo sailors do is they get out of the traffic lanes and they get into areas where they know they're not going to encounter a lot of traffic. And when they're sleeping, they slow down a lot and they kind of, set an autopilot and they sort of head in a direction they don't intend to meet a lot of traffic. But you're definitely not, if you're sleeping and you're the only one on board, you don't really have a lookout. So you're definitely putting yourself in a certain sense of danger at that point. Okay, was that the sum of the questions thus far?
Yes.
Okay, so let me jump ahead to rule 7, which is risk of collision. And we're going to talk about a pretty important concept here. So risk of collision is basically says that you need to be able to determine if a risk of collision exists. So if you're out there, you have to be able to look out, either as the lookout or the helmsman, the captain, the mate on watch, whoever's in control of the bridge or the boat, needs to be able to look out and determine, is there a risk of collision? There's going to be a lot of boats out there, and some of them are going to present a risk of collision and some of them aren't. Most of them aren't. You're going to pass most boats just fine, and there's never going to be a real extreme risk of collision. So you may be able to just look out the window and determine this. If you look at a boat and you go, I think if he keeps going where he's going and I keep going where I'm going, we're going to end up in the same spot, and that's going to be no good. You may be able to use your radar. In fact, a lot of radars now, there's even radars that they call ARPAs, which are like automated radars, which will make some of these decisions for you. They'll look at how a boat is progressing along and how you're progressing along and determine that you guys are going to end up in the same place at the same time. So the rule says try not to use bad info. Like, don't use your radar if you're getting too much backscatter and stuff like that. So you need to try and use the best information available to you to determine whether a risk of collision exists. So one of the best ways to determine if a risk of collision exists is to use a concept that's called constant relative bearing, or what we also like to call it is constant bearing decreasing range. So you see down here on my page, I put that in quotations, CBDR, constant bearing decreasing range. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. And if you have constant bearing decreasing range, you have an almost certain risk of collision. That's basically telling you that two vessels are going to end up in the same place at the same time. If you don't have constant bearing decreasing range, there's still a possibility that a risk of collision exists, and you need to use your best common sense to determine if that's true. But this is an almost certain, most collisions are going to be preceded by a constant bearing decreasing range. So if you have constant bearing decreasing range, let me move on to the next slide and I'll show you what that means. So constant bearing decreasing range, let's go out on this hypothetical Sea Scout trip. And here we are on this boat that's in the middle of the page here. So we're on this boat and we're cruising along and we're heading this way. So I want you to imagine that this boat is continuing to move throughout the time that I'm talking here. And so is this boat up here, this other boat that we see off on the horizon. And they're quite possibly maybe quite a ways apart. But we look out the window, you're standing a good lookout, and you look out the window and you kind of look out over your port side here, and you see that there's a vessel out there on the horizon. And I put this bearing circle up here so that we could really kind of like drive home the point. So when you look out the window, you'll notice that it's really easy to tell, because I put this bearing circle here, that they're about 320 degrees relative to us. So we're looking out there and we see them out there at about 320. And we continue to cruise along, and it doesn't really matter which direction we're going. It could be north, but we're looking at relative bearing here, not true bearing. So we're cruising along and we see this boat out at 320, and they're at some distance. And it doesn't really matter what the distance is, but we know that they're at some distance, and we'll call it this distance. And so we have this distance out there, and then we cruise along for a little while longer, and the lookout looks out and notices that the boat has gotten a little bit closer to us, that we're cruising along and we're going on a nice straight line and they're going on a nice straight line. But we look out the window and we notice that the boat has gotten a little bit closer to us as we've progressed, but they're still at about 320 degrees, what we would call constant bearing. The relative bearing of that vessel hasn't changed. They're still at like 320 degrees, but they're closer, decreasing range. And a little while later, we look out the window and we notice again that they've gotten a little closer, but yet, even though they're not pointed right at us, they're continuing to progress in such a fashion as to be at the same relative bearing to us. And so every time we look out the window, we notice that they're at the same relative bearing, but they keep getting closer and closer. And no matter how, as they progress on that same path and we progress on our same path, what we're going to find is eventually, if we have a constant bearing and a decreasing range, the two boats are eventually going to end up in the same place at the same time, which is a collision. So if we're in this situation, one of us is going to need to make a change in order for us to not end up in the same place at the same time. So we're either going to need to slow down or turn. And what we're going to see in the next slide is that the best action that you can take is instead of changing speed a lot to avoid a collision, what you should typically do is try and avoid a collision by steering. So you should try and steer in a different direction so that we can avoid a collision. And this concept of constant bearing, decreasing range is pretty important, because if you look at it, you're going to end up in this situation sometime in your boating career, and it will always result in a collision unless you make a change. So this is a very good way to determine whether there's a risk of collision. So what should we do to avoid a collision? So there's a rule for that. Rule number 8 is action to avoid a collision. And the gist of what rule number 8 says is you should follow the rules. There's a bunch of rules that tell you whether you're the stand-on vessel or you're the giveaway vessel. You should make positive decisions in good time and be a good sailor. Well, you could say, what does all that mean? Well, what it means is make large changes. Make them obvious to other people. If you're cruising along and you think, well, if I just turn 1 or 2 degrees, we'll probably not hit each other, but it's going to be really hard for the other boat to see that you made a change. So you should make big changes so that it's obvious to other people that you're making a change and that you're paying attention, because they can't see into your wheelhouse and tell whether you're paying attention. So a big steering change is going to tell them, oh, that's good. That guy's steering to stay out of my way. You should try changing course only if possible. That's the better way. You know, instead of radical speed changes, it's harder to tell whether you've really avoided a risk of collision by changing your speed radically, because it kind of looks like you're headed in the same direction. So if you can change course to avoid a collision, that's a better action, assuming that you're already traveling at a safe speed. You should leave plenty of room. The rules of the road is not a game of like, let's see how close we can get to each other without hitting each other. Let's see if we can stay pretty far apart from each other. That's the real, best way to avoid a collision. Let's keep watching. After you make a change, you might make a change that's positive and is going to avoid a collision, and then something else changes. Maybe the other vessel changes course. Maybe, the wind changes. If the other vessel is a sailboat or you're a sailboat, you're going to be driven by the wind. So keep watching to make sure that you have really changed enough to avoid a collision. Get out of boats that you're supposed to get out of the way of. You'll see when we talk about vessel priority that, power boats are supposed to stay out of the way of other boats that are like restricted in ability to maneuver. So make sure you give those guys plenty of room. Do it early, leave plenty of room. It's always better to make changes early before it becomes critical. Know what you need to do to avoid a collision. When you look out the window and you say, I think I'm going to hit that boat, what should I do? Well, if I give a little steer, how much am I going to need to turn to avoid that? So you need to engage some common sense there. And then even if you are if you're the stand-on vessel and you're looking out, you still need to follow the rules. So you still, and the primary rule is let's avoid a collision. So that's the gist of what rule number 8 says. So jumping into, I told you there was a couple rules you should probably know by number. This is the one that I would recommend most that you know by number. If you travel in areas with significant commercial traffic, I know we do on our Sea Scout boat all the time. We travel across San Francisco Bay. We encounter tankers, tugboats, container ships on a regular basis. And they are usually constrained to using the channels that are available to them. And so we will hear regularly when there's a lot of recreational traffic out on the water, we will hear Coast Guard broadcasting Rule 9 on the radio, trying to remind everybody to stay out of the way of the big ships that need the narrow channels. So what rule number 9 says is, when you're in a channel, stay to the right. It's kind of like when you're driving on the road. If the channel is big enough for 2 vessels to pass in, it's nice if we stay to the right. Let's not take our half out of the middle. That way there's enough room for the other vessels to pass. If you're on the Great Lakes or Western rivers, even if you're supposed to stay to the right, the downbound traffic has the right of way. The reason is, usually if you're coming down a river, it's a little harder to stop and a little harder to steer because you've got a lot of water coming behind you. This is especially true on the Mississippi River. A lot of water moves down that river, and like bigger vessels will have a lot of trouble stopping and turning while they've got all that momentum up and the water coming behind them. So if you're in a river, you should give downbound traffic the right of way because it's a lot easier as you're upbound to steer and stop. Small boats and sailboats should stay out of the way of big ships that need the channel. We sometimes refer to this as the law of tonnage. The law of tonnage is not actually written anywhere in the rules, but you'll hear people talk about it. It basically says small boats should stay out of the way of big boats that need the channels to maneuver. Don't fish across a channel. You shouldn't drape fishing lines and nets across a channel that ships need to transit. This happens a lot in Puget Sound. Don't cross in a channel in front of a ship. If a ship is moving in a channel, it's probably pretty hard for them to stop. They've got a lot of momentum. Don't cross close in front of them if they're stuck in a channel. They're not going to be able to turn because they need to stay in that channel. If you're in a channel and you're following another vessel, and you want to go faster than them, it is up to the boat in front to decide whether it's safe for you to pass them. If they don't think there's enough room for you to pass, then that's their prerogative. So you need to make passing arrangements with the vessel in front. The vessel in front always has the right of way. You can move over to make room, but the overtaking vessel is still the giveaway vessel. So if you're the boat in back, and you want to pass, then you need to give way to the vessel in front. You're trying to go faster, then you need to make room. And keep a sharp lookout. In narrow channels, especially up in the rivers, you may come into a narrow channel where you take a bend and you don't know what's around that corner. So you definitely want to keep a sharp lookout. And last, seems very obvious, should be obvious to anybody who's gotten this far, don't anchor in the channel. If there is a channel that is a major transit way, you should not anchor in the middle of it. We see that a lot up in the Sacramento Delta. Okay, before we jump into giveaway and stand-on vessels, did we accumulate any questions there?
We did. And the question is, how do you deal with this with small boats like kayaking or canoeing? And I would think that they mean, can those vessels be seen on radar?
Yeah, so kayaks and like canoes and paddle boards and stuff typically can't be seen on radar. And actually, they're also very hard to see just looking out the window. I can recount several stories from working on tugboats in San Francisco where we encountered small boats on the bay, and like they're very hard to see. We used to see them a lot in the Oakland estuary. There's a lot of rowing in around there, and boats with low freeboard disappear on the water very easily. So, and because they're not metal, they don't show up on radar very well. So that really emphasizes the importance of lighting and stuff that we'll talk about on Wednesday, and the fact that you need to be really aware of where you're boating. Kayaks, canoes, paddle boards and stuff don't really belong in major commercial waterways because they're really kind of conflicting traffic. So that kind of goes back to the really being important, knowing your situation and knowing your boat. But that said, every vessel out on the water is required to follow the rules. So if you're a small boat or you're a big boat, you need to approach other traffic the same way you would approach any other traffic. So, but you have requirements to to follow as a small boat, and saying that you're just a small boat and you can't meet those requirements, like you can't bring the proper lights or something, really precludes you from being out on the water, like at night, for instance, if you can't light your vessel properly. So you need to pick your boating times and areas carefully, so that that you're really creating a safe situation for yourself. So I've seen all kinds of weird things happen out in the commercial waterways. I've seen canoes and kayaks go up the inside of ships that are trying to dock, and it's a really unsafe situation. So was that it for this section so far?
That's all. Well, wait, one more just popped in.
Okay.
And nope, that's quite all right. So
okay. So let's jump into, how do I know if I'm the giveaway vessel or the stand-on vessel, and what should I do? So we're going to talk first about giveaway vessels. So a giveaway vessel is needs to, if you are the giveaway vessel, you need to change course, speed, or both in order to avoid a collision. So you're going to be the vessel that's going to get out of the way of the stand-on vessel. So you need to, like we said earlier, better to change course if possible. If that's not going to be enough to avoid a collision, then change speed. Do both if you have to. Do it early so that everybody recognizes that you're doing it and you're doing it in time to avoid a collision. Make it obvious. Do not tick off on your speed just a little bit at a time, such that the other vessel is like, I'm not sure if we're going to avoid a collision. You should make obvious changes so that other people understand. When you make course changes, make them large enough that people will understand you've made a course change, and do as much or more than necessary. So don't, try and make as little change as possible to avoid a collision. So you should make it clear that you've made a large enough course change to avoid the stand-on vessel in any meeting situation. So action by a stand-on vessel. If you're the stand-on vessel, primarily your job is to maintain course and speed. And the reason that you should maintain course and speed is the giveaway vessel is going to try and avoid you. That's their job. Your job is to kind of be consistent, so that as the stand-on vessel, you should try and be consistent and try and do the same thing, so that you're not making kind of a moving target for the giveaway vessel. So the giveaway vessel is going to count on you to just kind of keep doing what you're doing so that they can go around you. You should only change course or speed if the giveaway vessel doesn't. Maybe they're not really good at the rules. They don't realize that they are the giveaway vessel. Well, your primary job on any vessel is to try and avoid collision. So if it's getting too late to avoid a collision and the giveaway vessel hasn't changed course or speed, change course or speed if you have to. But primarily your job is to maintain. Maybe the giveaway vessel doesn't change enough. They don't, maybe they can't. They're confined by a channel or something like that. If they try and turn, and they turn as much as they can, or they try and slow down as much as they can, and you still need to change course or speed, then do what you've got to do. But typically the rule is don't turn to port. So just like when we drive on the street, we try to stay to the right. If you're going to make a change as the stand-on vessel, you should try and make that change to starboard. You should try and make a right turn to avoid. That way everybody knows we're all trying to go to the right to avoid each other. You don't want, one guy trying to turn one way and then you kind of turn the same way, and then he turns and you turn, and you just end up in a collision in a different spot. So if you're the stand-on vessel and you have to change course, don't change course to port. Change course to starboard if at all possible. And all of these things that you may do not absolve the giveaway vessel of doing their job. The giveaway vessel should still be giving way. And so this rule does not absolve the giveaway vessel of giving way. So let's talk about how you know if you're the giveaway vessel or the stand-on vessel. So the giveaway vessel, and we're going to talk first about sailing vessels. So for sailing vessels, There are some specific rules that are only for sailing vessels. This is two sailing vessels meeting each other. If a sailing vessel is meeting a power vessel, the rules are a little bit different. But if we see two sailing vessels meeting each other, the first thing we need to know is, where is the wind coming from? So let's look at this first line that we've got up here. And this first line we've got up here shows the wind coming straight out of, we'll call it the north, since it's the top of the page. So the wind is coming straight down the page. So everybody here has the wind from the top of the page. And so what that means is that vessel A here is on what we call a port tack, because the wind is coming from their port side. So if the wind is on your port side, your sail is on your starboard side, you're on a port tack. The wind is coming at you from your left. And vessel B is on a starboard tack. So that's how we decide who is the giveaway vessel and the stand-on vessel. If you are on a port tack, you are the giveaway vessel. So if the two vessels are on different tacks, port tack, give way. And so A in this situation will give way and will alter course to go around vessel B. Okay, so you see how they're going to follow this course. They're going to turn a little bit to the right and go around the stern of vessel B, while vessel B maintains course and speed because vessel B is the stand-on vessel. So that's how you remember. Two sailboats, different tacks, port tack, give way. The starboard tack will stand on. So let's encounter this other situation where we have two sailing vessels here on line 2 that you can kind of see that if they both maintain course and speed, they're probably going to collide somewhere over here. So we got the wind coming from the top of the page coming down, but both vessels are on the same tack. So we can't apply that first rule. They're both on the same tack. They're both on a starboard tack. So if we applied the first rule, we'd say, well, they're both the stand-on vessel, and they would stand on right up until they run into each other. So in the case of two vessels on the same tack, the windward vessel, or what we call the vessel closer to the wind, the vessel that is more upwind, will be the giveaway vessel. So in this case, again, vessel A is our giveaway vessel. They're farther upwind, and so vessel A is going to maneuver such to go around vessel B while vessel B maintains course and speed. So in order for vessel A to continue on where they want to go, they're going to go around the stern of vessel B. The primary, there's actually a really good reason for this one. The first sailing rule is kind of arbitrary. We had to kind of flip a coin and port lost. So with the wind on the same side, the reason that the windward vessel gives way is that you could see here that if vessel A continued on her course, she would actually block the wind for vessel B, and vessel B would lose like all propulsion and maneuverability because she wouldn't have any wind. She wouldn't be able to steer and propel herself anymore. So it makes sense that the windward vessel would try and stay out of the way of the leeward vessel so that they can both continue to maneuver. So if the wind is on the same side, the windward vessel gives way. So there's one more situation, although in theory, if you could always tell which tack you were on and who was the windward vessel, the first two rules, or the first two situations in Rule 12 here, would always apply. But there's a third situation that they conceptualized is, what if visibility or distance between vessels was such that you were on vessel A here on a port tack, and you looked out and you notice I took the coloring off of vessel B here, because what we're conceptualizing here is, what if we can't tell by looking off in the distance at vessel B what tack vessel B is on? So here you are on vessel A and you're on a port tack. Now vessel B is to windward. If both vessels are on the same tack, then vessel B would be the giveaway vessel because she's to windward. But let's suppose vessel B was going the other direction and we couldn't quite tell. Well, then vessel B would be the stand-on vessel because she is on a starboard tack and vessel A is on a port tack. So in this situation, if you can't tell what tack the other vessel is on because maybe, you know, whatever reason, visibility is poor or they're so far away that you can't tell, the port tack will always give way. That will take precedence. So if you can't tell, so what I say is give way if you can't say. So if you can't say what tack the other vessel is on and you're on the port tack, then you're the giveaway vessel. And that's just a kind of catch-all, just in case you can't tell. So you would steer down and try and avoid colliding with vessel B. So those are the 3 rules for sailing vessels encountering other sailing vessels. So just a quick review: port tack will give way if the vessels are on opposite tacks. Windward will give way if the vessels are on the same tack, and port tack will give way if you can't tell what tack a windward vessel is on. Okay, so that's pretty clear. I hope we didn't develop any questions over that one, did we?
Couple. So
couple. Okay.
And these came in prior to the in-depth discussion of Rule 12. So I think some of these have been answered, but let's just go through them quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one is, isn't there a rule to determine whether a vessel is a giveaway or stand-on vessel besides mobility? I think you covered that.
There is. So we're going to cover that in a little further depth even. So there is mobility, which is what we're going to call the vessel priority, which is going to be 2 slides from now and our last slide for this evening. But so this is the way we determine it for sailboats meeting each other on this slide. And on the next slide, we're going to talk about power vessels meeting each other, or 2 vessels of the same vessel category that'll help us determine which vessel is the stand-on vessel and which way is the giveaway vessel. And then there's also the vessel priority. So I think I'm going to continue to answer that question over the next 2 slides.
Okay, so then let's wait and let's keep going.
Okay. So let's talk about power vessels meeting each other. So we're going to talk about 3 different situations. These rules are rules 13, 14, and 15, and they're called other vessels rather than power vessels, because these could be vessels of any vessel category. They could even be sailboats, but we have some specific rules for sailing vessels meeting sailing vessels. But this would be for any vessel. The first one, Rule 13, about overtaking, is going to apply to any vessel regardless of vessel type. So in an overtaking situation, if vessel A is going faster than vessel B and wants to pass vessel B, vessel A will always, regardless of vessel type, regardless of any other rule that says determines give way or stand on vessel, the overtaking vessel will always be the giveaway vessel. So if you want to go faster than the boat in front of you and you have the wherewithal to do it, you need to steer clear of them and give them the right of way. So you're going to have to go out around. You can't expect this vessel to maneuver to allow you to pass. Now, if they're nice and you're in a narrow channel and you make passing arrangements, maybe you call them on the radio, maybe use some of the sound signals that we're going to talk about on Wednesday. They might be nice and move out of your way, but the onus is on you as the overtaking vessel to steer clear of the slower vessels. So that's going to be regardless of vessel type. The next rule is a head-on situation. So in a head-on situation, or what we also call a meeting situation, the 2 boats are coming straight at each other. There is no way to actually determine which vessel, assuming that the 2 vessels are of the same vessel category, same vessel type, there's no way to determine who is the stand-on vessel and the giveaway vessel. If they're different vessel types, then we will move on. We'll use vessel priority, which is we're going to cover next, to determine who's the stand-on vessel. But assuming that these 2 vessels were just your standard power vessels and they meet head-on, coming straight at each other, they're going to be neither vessel is going to be the stand-on vessel. So we're both going to turn to starboard. We're going to stay to the right. So it's just like driving on a street. We're going to stay to the right side of the road. So both A and B are going to alter course to starboard in a head-on situation. So that's pretty clear. Same vessel type, we're going to just move to the right and avoid each other. In a crossing situation, which is basically every other situation that's not overtaking or straight on, if we're in a situation, any other situation where we think there is a risk of collision, then the vessel on the left is going to be the giveaway vessel, and the vessel on the right is going to be the stand-on vessel. So I hope everybody can kind of see that concept here. You can see that vessel B will look to their left and see vessel A. Vessel A will look to their right and see vessel B. So the vessel on the right is the stand-on vessel. The vessel on the left is the giveaway vessel. If you're familiar with nav lights, which we're going to cover on Wednesday, you should be familiar that side lights are put on vessels such that the red light is on the left and the green light is on the right. Red light on the port side, green light on the starboard side. So if you notice, as vessel A is approaching vessel B, vessel A is going to see vessel B's red nav light, and vessel B is going to see vessel A's green nav light. So we can remember that green means go and red means stop, just like a traffic light. So that reminds vessel A that they are the vessel B rather, that they are the stand-on vessel, and they'll maintain course and speed, and vessel A will alter course to go around vessel B and avoid a collision. So best way to remember that, green means go, red means stop. And all you have to remember is that red is your port nav light, green is your starboard nav light. So the vessel on the left is going to be the giveaway vessel. So that covers all the situations that aren't like maneuverability, like the question asked. So all these encountering situations where the two vessels are of the same vessel type, or with overtaking regardless of vessel type. So the last subject that we're going to cover tonight is responsibility between vessels. And this is going to be the last check off for ordinary nav rules for tonight. One of the requirements is to understand responsibility between vessels. You may hear this called vessel priority. People talk about that a lot. They use that term quite a bit, vessel priority. Sometimes people call it the hierarchy or even the pecking order. Those are more like slang terms for this. But the gist of responsibility between vessels is we're going to categorize every vessel out there, and the vessels at the top of the list are going to be the stand-on vessel over any vessel lower than them on the list. So I've got a neat mnemonic for remembering responsibility between vessels, because there is 7 different vessel categories, and you need to make sure that you get them in order. So what we're going to remember is our new rods catch fish, so purchase some. So everybody kind of say that to yourselves. I know I can't hear you. I make my guys repeat it over and over to me. Our new rods catch fish, so purchase some. So you can envision a nice new fishing tackle store opened up, and they're selling new rods, and they guarantee that their rods catch fish, so you should come and purchase some. So we're going to remember this, and what we're going to do is we're going to take the first letter from each of those words, and that's going to be the first letter of each vessel category. So our starts with an O, and that's going to remind us that overtaken, oops, now I'm starting over. I'm having a technical difficulty here. So let's bear with me. Our new rods catch fish, so purchase some. So our is going to be overtaken, not to be confused with overtaking. Remember that the overtaken vessel, regardless of vessel type, is always going to have the highest priority. So overtaken is going to be at the top of the list. No matter what the vessel type, if you want to overtake them, you are the giveaway vessel. The overtaken vessel is the stand-on vessel. The next vessel category is going to be vessels not under command. Starts with an N, just like new. Not under command. Remember, vessels not under command are having maneuverability difficulties because of exceptional circumstances. Those are words right out of the rules of the road. So exceptional circumstances. This vessel has had something happen to them, like a power failure, propulsion failure, steering failure, something that is causing them to have difficulty maneuvering, but not something they set out to be. You know, they left thinking they were a good, solid power vessel, and they had some kind of propulsion failure that caused them this. And we'll talk about, you'll really learn more about lights when you study able nav, and a lot more about the different kinds of lights that a vessel not under command, when they had one of these exceptional circumstances, what lights or signals they would fly to indicate that they're a vessel not under command, so that you know that that boat is having trouble maneuvering. The next vessel category is going to start with an R, just like rods, and we're going to, that's called restricted in her ability to maneuver. So we talked about that in the definitions in the beginning of the rules. This is a vessel that by the nature of her work is having difficulty maneuvering. She set out to be this way. She's a dredge, a buoy tender, something like that, that by the nature of what she does is going to have difficulty maneuvering. So other than overtaken vessels or vessels not under command, everybody else should stay out of her way, because she's going to have more difficulty maneuvering than the other types of vessels. Now, a vessel not under command is in exceptional circumstances. They're probably having a really bad day. And so everybody's going to do the best to stay out of their way and let them kind of regain composure. So restricted inability to maneuver comes next. After that, we're going to get vessels that are constrained by draft. I mentioned during the definitions that this is an international only definition. We don't have this vessel category in inland rules. But if you do encounter a vessel that is flying lights or day shapes that indicates that she is constrained by her draft, that means that she probably has to stay right in this channel, because she's so deep that any water around her is too shallow for her to maneuver in. So you should try and stay out of her way. That's going to be, you know, bigger ships navigating in narrow channels in international rules. After that is going to be F, which stands for fishing. So that's going to be vessels engaged in fishing. So any vessel that's engaged in fishing, you know, commercial fishing, dragging nets, long lining, where they have like miles of line out behind them, we're going to give them priority over other types of vessels so that they can maneuver with all that gear. Next on the list, starting with an S, you might guess, is sailing vessels. So sailing vessels, I want to point out a common misconception. A common public misconception is that sailing vessels have priority over all other types of vessels. A lot of sailors seem to think that this is true. It is absolutely not true. You'll notice how far down this list of only 7 vessel categories, of 8 vessel categories, out of 8 vessel categories, sailing vessel comes in number 6. So sailing vessels are pretty far down the list. They need to stay out of the way of all these other vessels. So number 6 is sailing vessels, starting with an S. Next, we're going to go for another P, or our first P, which is power vessels. So all of your standard power vessels, including wing and ground vessels, which I told you you're probably unlikely to encounter, power-driven vessels and wing and ground vessels that are operating on the water surface. So basically, they're acting like power boats. So coming in number 7 out of all 8 categories is going to be power vessels. And the only category of vessels that power vessels get to have priority over is S for seaplanes. So seaplanes, which have a tendency to take off and land on the water in front of all these other vessels, are going to need to give priority to other vessels. So if these types of vessels encounter each other, this is the priority that we use to determine which vessel has priority, which vessel is the giveaway vessel and which way is the stand-on vessel. If 2 vessels that are of the same category meet, then we use the rules that we just learned. So this is an important distinction to understand, that that you need to know the vessel priority so that you know who is supposed to stay out of your way and whose way are you supposed to stay out of. So I'll just run through that one more time real quick so that everybody gets a chance to remember our mnemonic. So our new rods catch fish, so purchase some. Overtaken, not under command, restricted inability to maneuver, constrained by her draft, vessel engaged in fishing, sailing, power, and seaplanes. So you can use that mnemonic to try and help you remember that vessel priority. And that's key, because you're gonna, if you go out on, anything that is navigable waters, you're gonna encounter these other types of vessels. So this is the end of the content that I have for tonight. I've got nav lights and sound signals for Wednesday evening. We're going to cover the last two requirements. There's a decent amount of content there. We're going to cover just really basic lights for power vessels and sailing vessels and smaller vessels. When you get into able, you really start to cover all the in-depth lights and towing lights and all the different lights that go with those different vessel categories we just talked about. Get a little more complicated. So that's something that we cover in the next requirement. So this is a good place for us to break until next time, but I'm happy to answer any further questions that have come up. I've got nowhere special to be in my quarantine here, so.
Well, Max, that was exceptional, truly brilliant. We have a few questions, and
Okay.
a couple are a little on the hypothetical side, but let's go through them. So one is, what if you're as far right as possible and collision might be imminent? And I think they're looking for, what do you do in that scenario?
Yeah, so in that scenario, that's going to be a scenario where you're going to switch from course changes to speed changes. So like we discussed, what should you do to avoid collision? First and foremost, you should try and change course. It's a lot easier for people to see that you're changing course than changing speed sometimes, depending on how fast you're going and how big a vessel you are. It's hard to see a couple knot change in a really big vessel, so people might not be able to tell that you've done that. And so that's the real driving reason for changing course rather than changing speed. Now, if you've exhausted your course change to the point where you still don't think you're going to avoid a collision, that's the point at which you start making speed changes. You slow down. And engage some common sense. We've said try to turn right as much as possible. I have absolutely turned left to avoid a collision at times. I mean, this is where you have to kind of engage those early rules that say use some common sense, do the best things you can at the time. But, try and do these things early. That's really like something that I hope you take away from some of the interpretations I've made of the rules, is the earlier that you make these changes, the more likely you are to kind of broadcast those changes to other people and to avoid a collision. I mean, it just really helps. But yeah, if you've exhausted your course change capability, maybe because of land or something like that. I mean, if you're in a situation where you can round up and turn around, I mean, I guess that's kind of an extreme course change, but maybe that's what you have to do. I've certainly done it before, but yeah, if you've exhausted your course change, speed change.
This is actually really thoughtful. How close do you need to be considered an overtaking vessel? And I'm just thinking about plain language and putting on my lawyer hat. That's a good question. When are you considered overtaking?
Yeah, that is a good question. And so certainly, like, the easy answers are, well, if you're in a channel and you're both transiting in a channel that's prescribed, by markers or buoys or something, I would say any any passing situation is an overtaking situation. So that's like a softball. If you're in kind of open water, like, transiting, I'll keep using San Francisco examples because that's my home waters. If you're transiting Central Bay, where you're kind of at this area where channels are coming and going, but you're not really in a channel, common sense prevails. So if you're going the same direction and you're close enough to create a collision risk, then or basically, if you're so close to as to make the other vessel nervous, I would call that an overtaking situation. If I was across the bay and I'm just going faster than somebody that I can see way off in the distance, that's clearly not. And so you kind of have to engage some common sense. Is the real answer is you overtaking that vessel going to pose a collision risk? And so, you know, you might, the things you might take into account to do that. For me all the time, I mean, our Sea Scout vessel is a power vessel. We can go in a straight line really easily. If we're overtaking a sailing vessel that seems to be going off this way, but I know that the next move is for them to tack, I would definitely take that into consideration. So a lot of times I'll actually try and overtake on the less logical side because I know their next move is going to be to go this way. So you just kind of have to take all the circumstances into consideration and ask yourself, does my, you know, making this move present more of a collision risk?
So one question came in about someone who has a conflict on Wednesday night. This will be recorded and you'll be able to see it on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. So we regret you can't make it Wednesday, but there will be a recording. And right now, the current final question is hypothetical. In a situation with two sailing vessels, if you are on starboard tack and cannot determine tack of other vessel, are you still the stand-on vessel?
It would depend whether you were to windward or to leeward. So let me back up to that slide. Let me see, I can probably just click on that slide. There we go. So if you were the starboard vessel, if you were on a starboard tack and you couldn't determine the tack of the other vessel, you would, if you were to windward, you would be the stand-on vessel because that would be this situation in reverse, right? So if you were I guess the answer is yes. You are the stand-on vessel because if you are on a starboard tack and the other vessel is on a port tack and you can't determine their tack, it's quite probable that they can't determine yours either, and you're far enough apart. So you should probably stand on up until the point where we engage that rule where we say if the giveaway vessel isn't giving way, if you think you are growing closer and closer to an imminent collision situation, then you should start maneuvering such that that you would avoid that collision. I would assume by that point you'd be close enough that you could probably determine which tack you both will be able to determine which tack you're on. But sometimes it's actually pretty hard to tell. You'd think, like, from looking at my overhead shots here, that everything should be easy to determine. But sometimes when you're out on the water, your eyes can kind of play tricks on you. You know, light backscatter, weather, you know, things like that. So the short answer is yes, you're the stand-on vessel. But like everybody, you have a you have an obligation to ultimately avoid a collision. So if it doesn't seem as though the other vessel is taking action, then you should take action early enough to avoid the collision.
Excellent. Someone asked about the Wednesday night presentation. The registration link is in the chat, or you can watch on Facebook Live, or you can register on Facebook. We do have an event there as well. So multiple ways for you to register or just watch live with Facebook Live. Skipper Rosenberg, we appreciate your time and expertise. And to the 83 people who watched this evening on Zoom, thank you for tuning in, and everyone who watched on Facebook Live, thank you for viewing as well as on YouTube. And with that, we'll close out. And Max, we'll see you Wednesday, and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you guys Wednesday.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.